Is now really a better time to buy in BC compared to the peak real estate market that we often reference in 2021 or 2022? In March of 2022, you need about $189,000 a year in income to qualify for the benchmark Fraser Valley home. Today, roughly, it's about 150 grand. So 100 mortgage rates are roughly double what they were then. But how exactly does that math work? And what does it mean if you're sitting on the sidelines waiting for the right time? So today we're going to walk through the actual numbers row by row and talk about what it means for buyers, for people who bought at the peak and are coming up for renewal, and also for anyone trying to time this market and maybe get in right now. Practically, oftentimes Cole and myself or other agents out in the marketplace and mortgage brokers as well, will often compare markets to try and tell a story or try to help people understand the differences and the nuances of what was going on in the past to what's going on right now and potentially what that means for the future. So let's set the scene and let's talk about March 2022. So Cole, maybe talk about on the financing side, what were things looking like at that time?
They're nice, Austin. Things are really nice. And maybe not March 22 so much, but like just before that, actually. So let me step back. March 2022 is when things kind of started to shift a little bit in terms of rates. We started to see rates come up. There was some talk about what's going to happen with the Bank of Canada. Are they eventually going to have to raise rates? But leading up to March 2022, especially 2021, rates are really nice. And if you guys happen to block out COVID, that's a big reason for that. So, things were a little uncertain, especially when COVID started, and money was cheap in terms of it was easy to borrow money. Rates were low and you could qualify for more hypothetically based on lower rates, but at the same time, prices were higher. So that's where in Austin's intro, he's like, well, you needed more income actually to qualify for the benchmark price, even with rates lower. So a lot of people got good rates at that time, assuming it was around 2021, 2022. They've either already renewed or they're going to be renewing very soon. We're going to touch on that a little bit more on this episode. But yeah, rates were really nice at that time, Austin.
Yeah, and I think if I can kind of, as much as rates were better, I think is the quick summarized way of what you were talking about. I think what we saw was with people unable to travel, with people unable to do other things, people that were still working full time, or maybe working from home or whatever else, they had a lot more disposable income because, they weren't taking that vacation. They weren't doing whatever else. And practically as well, let's reference something. What percentage of people were probably taking variable rate mortgages at that time or were in a variable rate prior to COVID? 50, what's the split typically? Like 50-50?
Probably
60,
not
40?
that high, but it was certainly more than it would be now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I don't have those exact numbers.
Okay.
I appreciate you putting me on the spot there,
Yeah.
but no,
You're
in all joking.
See if I can get you again.
Aside.
But so the reason I asked that is, as much as we talk about rates going up, like Bank of Canada rates, and how people that are in a variable rate mortgage, how it's costing them more money per month and how that's bad. On the flip side of that, what we saw during COVID was anybody that was in a variable rate mortgage, their rates dropped pretty significantly and maybe they were saving, whether that's $100 or $200 a month on their mortgage, which all of a sudden, rates go down. They have a little bit more disposable income. A lot of people started working from home. Maybe they weren't spending as much money on gas, commuting, car maintenance, like all of those other things. People had a little bit more income and they felt pretty good about that. And with rates being lower, a lot of people decided to make a move because it made sense, all that other stuff. And then let's compare that as well, like price side wise. So MLS HPI price, was just at the peak was just under 1.2 and it's sitting at about 884,800 today. So you're about 310 grand lower. That's quite a bit of a difference.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy number when you think of it that way. And I mean, so with that, Austin, to kind of pile onto the numbers or add on to the numbers is the down payment requirement.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking 20%, and let's just use 20% as an example, we know there's other options out there and there's been changes to insured mortgages, for example, where you can now get an insured mortgage for over $1 million. But for argument's sake, let's look at 20%. We're looking at $60,000 less to buy a benchmark price home now than we were just 4 years ago. or just over 4 years ago. That's a huge difference from a savings perspective in terms of what's required to put 20% down. And then those numbers trickle down to insured mortgages as well, right? So that same percentage or that same amount you needed in order to get the percentage you needed, whether that's a 5% or above, that actual dollar amount is now lower as well because prices have come down. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. And then because of the down payment being lower, the mortgage amount is also going to be lower because the purchase price is lower. So it's a big difference. To save 62 grand takes a lot of time. So having to save less or $62,000 less can potentially get somebody into position to buy sooner or to be in an equity position to move up, which we've talked about quite a bit as well. They don't need the same amount of equity in order to have the down payment they need to then move up. So very interesting stuff there.
Yeah, no, totally. And, going back to 2022, just before we transition into obviously the, rate, we'll be talking a little bit more about rates, but pace of the market wise, I would say like 60 to 70% of the homes that were hitting the market would hit the market on Monday or Tuesday, have showings or open houses over the weekend, and they'd be looking at offers the next following Monday. And literally you'd have a week to do all your due diligence, what that's reading through strata documents ahead of time, reviewing the property disclosure statement, pre-offer inspections if you decided to do one. And that's a story for another time. But, bidding wars, whole 9 yards. It was just it was kind of an auction-like scenario in a lot of cases for homes.
Bingo. That was the word I was just going to use, Austin. You just said it, auction. I'm like, it honestly felt like an auction at that point.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about, let's transition back to rates, because I think obviously when we're talking about it's being a more affordable, a lot of that comes down to the finance side. So let's compare rates and amortizations and monthly payments.
Yeah, for sure. So for the purpose of this breakdown, I used a rate of 2% back in 2022. Things could have been a little bit lower than that, could have been a little bit higher than that, depending on your timing. And then rate for today, I used a 4% rate, which is very competitive today. So I was trying to be reasonable, but it's a good comparison because it's a double rate, or the rate's been doubled, excuse me. And now let's look at some numbers here. So from a monthly payment perspective, 25-year amortization, pretty standard amortization. Back then you were looking at just over $4,000. Now you're looking at about $3,700 a month. And then for a 30-year amortization, which is going to be a lower payment because you're able to stretch that mortgage longer, it's going to be $3,500 compared to about $3,300. So even with the rate doubling, the monthly payment is actually lower today because prices have dropped enough to outweigh that higher rate. So you're going to pay a bit more interest with the higher rate, but the reality is your monthly cash flow, or the amount you have to put forward for your housing costs, are going to be lower from a mortgage perspective. And then not to mention qualification comes into that as well, right? Because now you're qualifying for a lower payment, because really what you're qualifying for, people need to remember, is you're qualifying for the mortgage, but you're qualifying for the payment. That's what we care about. It's can I afford this payment based on the income that I can provide? The total loan amount is based on how much you could pay per month. But really, it's the monthly payment that we're qualifying you on, because that number has to fit within the guidelines of what's allowed for each lender. So anything you want to add there? Also, I think that's kind of my realm, but
No, I think you nailed that. Let's kind of transition into, obviously there's the stress test angle as well as the renewal angle as well. So
for sure,
let's talk about stress tests, because I don't think a lot of people understand that exactly. Okay. So and how that would be different. So maybe you can help explain that to them.
Yeah, let's talk about the stress test, and let's talk about how it actually will be applied differently today than it would have been in 2022. So the stress test has two criteria. The criteria are you either have to be able to qualify based on a rate of 5.25% or the higher of 5.25% or the actual rate that you're receiving on the mortgage plus 2%. So in my example, we used the current rate today of 4%. Therefore, you'd have to qualify at 6% because 6% is higher than 5.25%. But now if we go back to say March 2022, and we're using a rate of 2% plus another 2% is only 4%. That's not high enough to meet the criteria. Therefore, we're going to have to use the 5.25% for the stress test. So really, the stress test, which is actually the most important factor when it comes to qualifying, the rate is not that much different. It was 5.25% back in March of 2022. And today it's roughly 6% or a bit higher, depending on what actual rate you're getting. But that plays a significant factor when we're considering how much income is needed, because the cost is lower. So the income needed, Austin already broke this down in the intro, was about 40 grand less today for a 25-year amortization and about 35 grand less for a 30-year amortization. That's huge. 190 grand a year. Most people aren't making that individually. That's a very significant individual income. Household income, that's really a good household income, right? You have somebody making 100K, the other person's got to be making 90 in order to qualify for a 25-year amortization. Today it's 150. I'm not saying that that's not a significant amount of income, but remember, we're talking about benchmark prices here. We're talking about almost a $900,000 purchase price. You don't have to spend $900,000 to get in the market, right? So that is a positive in terms of the amount of income you need to qualify is less, meaning that you have more of an opportunity to get into something that you're actually looking to buy as opposed to just getting into the market at this point. Any thoughts on that, Austin?
No, very, very, very well. Very well said, very well explained. Like, we talk about all the time, not necessarily about like what you qualify for, but what you feel comfortable paying. That's a much different conversation. And that's broken down really well, especially when you're looking at like a percentage of income or the amount that would be devoted to that. Like even like that 30 or 40 grand difference, you break that up per month, like that's a 2 or 3 grand a month at least. Well, at least 3 grand a month, right?
Yeah, and that people don't have that income because like let's use the example of the lowest option here. So as of today, based on the numbers we're using, you need about 140 grand of income for a 30-year amortization based on buying a benchmark home. That's two people with a $70,000 income. That's not an insignificant number. Like that's a pretty good income for most people, right?
Yeah.
So that number is not low. And then back in
I don't want to say
2022,
it's pretty attainable, but I think that it's like, it's two solid incomes.
yeah,
But
for sure. Especially more. Sorry, go ahead.
I think if two people are working full time,
Yeah,
with with some experience or maybe like I think it possible, reasonable to reach.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot different than 175,000. Now we're talking about you're making 85,000 plus each, or almost $90,000 each,
Yeah.
and it's a different story, right? And not to mention, obviously, back in 2022, like there was a lot of people that weren't working or had harder time getting jobs at that time. So,
Or their industries closed down or restricted hours or et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
yeah, working less for sure. So there's a lot to be said about that. So I'm gonna keep rolling with the numbers here, and then also I'm gonna bring you back in and let's kind of just tie everything together here because I think that's the most important part. But the other thing you have to consider is so the mortgage balance is starting lower. So it's going to be lower when you come up for renewal because you're borrowing less money. So again, going to throw you some numbers at you guys. So a mortgage renewal after 5 years, even based on that 2% rate, would have been around $800,000. So that would have been basically like now. Assuming you bought a benchmark price and you needed to renew this year, you're probably owing around 800K. Whereas today, in 5 years from now, you're going to only owe about 600. So that's almost $200,000 difference. And at the end of the day, it costs money to borrow money. So there's a lot to be said about that. And then the example with 30-year amortization, it's about the same. It's about a 200 grand difference in what your balance would be after 5 years. So even at a higher interest rate, you're still going to have a significantly lower balance because you're borrowing less from the get-go. And remember, your payment's also lower. So you got lower payment, you got a lower outstanding balance, and you got less income to qualify. And the price is lower. I mean, I don't know what else you could really ask for there.
Well, and I just think too, if it's a smaller purchase price and smaller mortgage, and depending on what your income is and what you can qualify for, if you can afford to or choose to make some additional payments and try and, pay that off earlier or quicker, like that's a great position to be in. Amazing position to be in. So definitely some opportunity there, depending on your situation for sure.
Absolutely. And so like I said, I'm gonna bring you back in here because I want to talk things over here. But I want to talk to the people that are coming up for renewal really quickly. So rates have obviously gone up. A lot of people have already renewed, but there is going to be renewals coming up. Good news is rates have been fairly steady over the last 6+ months, which is good from the perspective of you don't feel like you have to move quickly on taking a rate because it feels like they're going to kind of be the same. But what I want to say is be ready for your renewal. Don't wait until even 3 months before, like 6 months before at the latest. I would be looking at it a full year out is when I would start considering, okay, what am I going to do at renewal time? Do I need to make any changes? What's my payment going to look like? Just prepare for that because you don't want to come into your renewal and go, oh my gosh, my payment's going to go up X amount. I didn't know that. It's like, well, you could have known that. You could have planned ahead for that, right? Obviously rates can change over a year, but what I'm trying to say is we're in a relatively stable environment for rates right now. And it's not hard to project approximately what that payment's going to look like and whether or not that's something you're going to be able to deal with. Because I'm not saying you should sell your home here, but if you're going to be in a situation where you can't actually afford whatever that payment's going to be, plan ahead, right? Because Austin's going to be much happier if you call him and say, hey, we might have to sell in the next 3 months, as opposed to, hey, we need to sell by the end of this month. And if we don't, then we're going to potentially lose our home. Now, it's an extreme example, but the point is planning will ultimately save you a lot of heartache. So that's my recommendation always when it comes to
and that full transparency, that sounds a little bit grim when
of
words it like that. But what I can also say to give this more context is I think, or I hope, that most people that were locking in at like a 2% interest rate knew that probably rates wouldn't be the same as that for the rest of their life. Like most people understood that probably, I mean, I wouldn't say it's an average, but you're probably looking at what, like 4% is over a long enough time horizon is roughly what rates will
like
kind of
average if like over the course of your mortgage.
That's plus or minus a quarter point there would be probably the average. I know that's like a 0.5% range, but bear with me for an example. Most people, assuming that they were stress tested, probably can qualify for that mortgage when they would have signed that. But when Cole is talking about not being able to afford that payment because of the price of everything else going up, and your mortgage also potentially going up, and everything else, cost of living. We've had lots of episodes on that. That's where people kind of get in trouble with this. So yeah. Anything else to add on that?
No. Let's just talk about the broader picture here when it comes to timing the market, opportunity. Like, I wanted to obviously get into the numbers and try to put some context behind why we do strongly believe that things are better compared to when they were at the peak. But the reality is, like, everybody's situation is different. And let's just talk about kind of more general what your thoughts are on that and how you would best support people in getting into the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than anything, inventory's up, lots to choose from. You have more leverage when you're buying as well. Sometimes it's just about being patient as well. So maybe you find something that you like, and maybe you give it a bit of time before you write an offer to see, longer days on market, the longer leverage you lose, unless you see something come on at a really, really good price, and you are seeing some of that. Like, I would say that average days on market is probably up, but you're still seeing some homes, and I see it all the time with clients when I have searches set up for their criteria. Like, you'll see something come on that's super interesting and they want to go look at it, and maybe they're a couple days late and it's got an accepted offer already because somebody else has seen the value in it, and they say, well, for that price I'll do it, and it kind of gets a bite quickly. As long as you're marketed well and priced correctly, things will go. But for stuff that you see is maybe a little bit high, maybe you wait a bit before submitting an offer, and that'll give you more leverage when you're purchasing. Be really mindful and take the time to look at a couple extra places, make sure that the one you want is the one you want. You obviously have time to do that. But with that being said, if you see an 8.5 out of 10 that you can make a 10 out of 10, just know when it's also time to kind of zero in on the right place as well. Don't let too many options be problematic either.
That's good. That's a really good point, is don't bog yourself down in too many choices, right? You gotta, at the end of the day, if you want to make a choice, you got to make a choice. So no, I think really what the point of today's episode is to show you that there is opportunity now. Where are things going to go? We never really know. But markets can also, the individual markets can shift too. We've had episodes where we've talked about that as well. This is a very general approach. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. A general overview of, okay, we're taking a benchmark price and a benchmark price. Now, that's not, most homes don't sell at a benchmark price, right? Like, we're just trying to look at, okay, how do we compare things, and how can things be better today than they were then, and what opportunities those might provide in the future, because we don't know what's going to happen. But if I have to say one thing, it's, if you're going to buy a place, intend to live there for 5+ years, ideally closer to the 10-year mark, if your goal is to build equity and your goal is to hopefully realize some appreciation on that place, because short-term right now is risky if you're looking to try to make a short-term gain. I think that's fair to say. And that's my opinion, but I think that a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah, no, very, very well said. Okay, let's bring this home. So, like we've talked about and Cole's mentioned, income to qualify has dropped like 40 grand a year, so 38 grand roughly, despite rates doubling. And that's because of, again, the adjustment in prices and rates and everything else. Listeners, if you bought at the peak and want a renewal check-in, now is a good time to do that. Same thing if you're wanting to look at maybe how your market value has changed, depending on what product you bought and when you bought it. There's definitely some people that still have some equity gained and have still made some money. That's definitely out there, and a move might be in your cards with these rate changes as well. Maybe you're going to a different product and your down payment's a little bit smaller than you would have liked, but maybe your monthly payment's a bit better. Like, it is possible. We've obviously worked together on helping some people kind of carve out what those numbers actually look like to facilitate a move. And a lot of times there's ways to be creative if a move is something that you need. As much as there's people that want to move, there's always people that need to move. Maybe you need more space. Maybe job change, you need to get into a different area, all that kind of stuff. So definitely possible. If you have any questions, never hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to help. If you're listening and not subscribed, make sure to do that. That way you get notified as soon as we drop an episode. And of course, leave us a 5-star review. We do appreciate that a ton. I'm Austin.
I'm Cole.
And this has been another episode of the Full Subjects Podcast.
Thanks, guys.